you have a new piece out at your publication, The American Conservative Tack, about Kissinger's recent comments to a German TV outlet, lamenting the effects of mass migration. Can you lay out for us some of your observations in that piece?
Yeah, so it took Kissinger 100 years to come to this conclusion. Fundamentally, the argument is that if you have a concept set of nationhood that defines national interest, then that is one thing. However, what we are seeing in both our campuses and in Europe is multiple personalities and multiple loyalties towards a cause. And that is, in Orwellian term, as George Orwell wrote at one point in time, that's called transferred nationality. So when you're in your own country, nationalism is delegitimized so much, then you kind of latch on to someone else's nationalism, and that becomes your cause, to go forward to. So whether it's Palestine or Turkey and Turkish and Kurdish problems in Washington, D.C., or Indians and Pakistanis fighting in the UK, or Israelis and Palestinians in Europe, or anything of that sort, it's fundamentally a sort of nationhood that is latched on, that, for those people who cannot, Germans of all people, like obviously they are discouraged to have any kind of appropriate nationalism other than when they're playing soccer, for example. So it's kind of weird to see, in their streets, there's mass brawl happening. So that's one thing. The second is migration, at least up until 1945, used to be a kind of like an assimilationist process where overall the burden of assimilation used to be on the migrants. So they had to change their way of life. They had to change. I mean, you probably know more than anything, the Irish Americans, for example, when they first came, they anglicized themselves. So with the German Americans, when they went and settled down in the Midwest, for example, all the, from North Europe and Germany, they changed their names, they changed the way of talking, they kind of assimilated to the dominant culture. That changed from 1945 onwards. Now, fundamentally, because of two reasons. One, post-1945, nationalism was discouraged because it was considered to be the main cause of two world wars. And secondly, this normative idea of legitimizing human rights above every other principle in the world kind of led to this situation where malcontent, so to speak, could take advantage of that process. So, for example, if someone comes to your country and refuses to assimilate, you won't be able to send them back because they're going to cry human rights. So it's fundamentally a structure that's kind of like a legacy of the Second World War. Now, obviously, this is not 1945. The great powers who were powerful in those days are not that powerful anymore. Most of the European powers have, atrophied. America is not the same as America of 1945. The world has completely changed. So we are kind of like sticking by to old rules.
That we are, and it is strange. I think what you're arguing as well, it lends a lot of credence to the idea that the West, especially America and Western Europe, we've kind of turned ourselves into mere economic zones. Hence, like what we see happening in the U.S. Congress, you have, Representative Brian Mast, Republican, wearing his IDF uniform, and then you have on the other side of things, Democrat Rashida Tlaib, Congresswoman, draping herself in the Palestinian flag. And whatever your thoughts are on Israel and the appropriateness of a U.S. congressman going to do his conduct his official capacity wearing a foreign uniform, but that kind of just shows that we've kind of hollowed ourselves out, like you were saying, no national identity here in the U.S. necessarily to be found, and then we just kind of become just an economic zone where other interests then compete. They want money, they want grants, they want support, like we joke about with Zelensky going hat in hand to every nation that he can to get that support. And again, we get why he's doing that for his national interest, but is in our national interest to do so. But then these are the talks that we're having, is national interest for everybody else and not so much for us. So that puts us in a kind of a strange predicament. But it also kind of wanted to bring up Kissinger's other point, like you joked, it took him 100 years to finally get to this point, and not to knock the man. He's a very brilliant man, and I'm, as you know, reading his books as well. I bought even more, so chugging along. Those are big books, pretty chonky for anyone who's seen them. But his other adage that he said, to be America's enemy is dangerous, we've seen the wars, but to be its friend is fatal. And at first you think that seems counterintuitive, but maybe with Ukraine versus Israel and how America is going to be moving forward with foreign policy, do you think that brings to life that adage?
Right. I mean, so you raised two very important points about well, firstly, the entire thing, the spectacle of Brian Mast wearing a foreign uniform and saying, I would always stand with the IDF while being a running U.S. congressman in the U.S. Congress is one of the most bizarre things I've seen.